My parents defended my brother's $60,000 debt, tried to access my bank account, called me Selifsh for saying no. Here's how I fought back. I never imagined that one day my parents would accuse me of being selfish for not helping my brother, but that's exactly what happened. My name is Sarah, and I've always tried to be the responsible one in my family. Growing up, I was the one who worked hard, saved money, and kept my life in order. My younger brother Tom, on the other hand, was a bit more reckless. He was the golden child in the family, always getting away with things, always forgiven, even when he made mistakes. The dynamic between my family and me was always somewhat strained. I didn't mind being the black sheep in the family. I was content being my own person, making my own decisions, and not relying on others. However, I never expected things to go this far. The tipping point came when my brother accumulated a staggering $60,000 in debt he had no way of repaying. And the real kicker? My parents, instead of holding him accountable, turned to me for help. It all started when Tom came to me in a panic one evening. He looked disheveled, not at all his usual confident self. "Sarah, I really need your help," he said, his voice filled with desperation. "I've racked up a massive amount of debt, and I don't know how to get out of it. Please, I need you to help me pay it off." I stared at him, shocked. "What do you mean, pay it off? How did you even get that much in debt?" Tom hesitated, then mumbled, "Credit cards, personal loans, bad investments." I got too carried away. I didn't think it would spiral out of control like this. I could feel my heart rate quicken. As much as I cared about Tom, I couldn't just sweep this under the rug. "Tom, you're an adult," I said, my voice firm. "You need to take responsibility for your own actions. I can't just give you $60,000. But Tom wasn't having it. He looked at me like I had just stabbed him in the back. "You don't understand. You've always had it easy. You don't know what it's like to be in my position." His words stung, but I held my ground. "I've worked hard for everything I have. I'm not just going to give away my savings to bail you out. You need to face the consequences of your choices." I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The next day, my parents called me. After that intense phone call, the pressure didn't let up. My parents kept sending me messages, trying to persuade me to change my mind. It was exhausting. Every time I checked my phone, there was another text from my mom or dad, full of guilt trips and blame. It felt like they were determined to make me feel like the bad guy for not helping my brother, Tom. "Sarah, you don't understand how serious this is. Tom's about to lose everything. He's asking you to help because you're his sister." "You can't just turn your back on him," my mom texted me late one night. It stung, and I felt torn. But I also knew this wasn't just about Tom anymore. It was about my own values, my own boundaries. I couldn't just let them guilt me into giving away everything I'd worked so hard for. Tom had made his own choices, and now he had to face the consequences. I tried to stay calm, but the constant pressure from my parents weighed heavily on me. They kept saying, "Family comes first," and that I was being selfish. I couldn't help but feel like they were treating me as if my hard-earned savings were somehow theirs to spend on Tom's mistakes. It was frustrating beyond belief. I went a few days without responding, needing to process everything. My parents weren't respecting my boundaries, and it was starting to feel like a violation of my trust. I needed to have one final conversation to set things straight once and for all. I had to make them understand that I wasn't going to sacrifice my financial future to bail out Tom, no matter how much they begged. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed my parents' number again. I was tired of the back and forth texts. It was time to put an end to it. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," I said when they answered. "I've made my decision. I'm not going to give Tom any money to pay off his debt, and I'm not going to let you pressure me into it anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of the silence, but I didn't back down. "This isn't about me being selfish," I continued. "This is about boundaries. I've worked hard to build a stable life, and I'm not going to risk it just because Tom doesn't want to face the consequences of his actions. He's an adult, and he has to learn how to manage his own problems." Mom's voice cracked a little. But, Sarah, he's your brother. He needs you now more than ever. He can't handle this alone. Tom needs to face the reality of his choices, I replied, my voice steady. I can't keep rescuing him from his mistakes. If I keep giving in, I'll be enabling him to continue down this path, and that's not helping him. Then you're just being heartless, my dad snapped, his frustration clear. We've helped you when you were in trouble. This is the least you can do for your brother. I felt a wave of anger rise in me. I've never asked for you to pay my way, and I'm not going to do that for Tom. I've always worked for everything I have, and I'm not going to let anyone guilt trip me into doing something I know is wrong. At that point, my mom was silent. My dad's voice came through again, sharp and accusing. Fine. If that's how you feel, then maybe you're not the person we thought you were. I took a deep breath. Maybe I'm exactly the person you should have seen all along. Someone who isn't afraid to set boundaries. Someone who's not going to let you push me around. After that intense phone call, the pressure didn't let up. My parents kept sending me messages, trying to persuade me to change my mind. It was exhausting. Every time I checked my phone, there was another text from my mom or dad, full of guilt trips and blame. It felt like they were determined to make me feel like the bad guy for not helping my brother, Tom. Sarah, you don't understand how serious this is. Tom's about to lose everything. He's asking you to help because you're his sister. You can't just turn your back on him, my mom texted me late one night. It stung, and I felt torn. But I also knew this wasn't just about Tom anymore. It was about my own values, my own boundaries. I couldn't just let them guilt me into giving away everything I'd worked so hard for. Tom had made his own choices, and now he had to face the consequences. I tried to stay calm, but the constant pressure from my parents weighed heavily on me. They kept saying, family comes first, and that I was being selfish. I couldn't help but feel like they were treating me as if my hard-earned savings were somehow theirs to spend on Tom's mistakes. It was frustrating beyond belief. I went a few days without responding, needing to process everything. My parents weren't respecting my boundaries, and it was starting to feel like a violation of my trust. I needed to have one final conversation to set things straight once and for all. I had to make them understand that I wasn't going to sacrifice my financial future to bail out Tom, no matter how much they begged. Finally, I picked up the phone and dialed my parents' number again. I was tired of the back and forth texts. It was time to put an end to it. Mom, Dad, we need to talk, I said when they answered. I've made my decision. I'm not going to give Tom any money to pay off his debt, and I'm not going to let you pressure me into it anymore. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of the silence, but I didn't back down. This isn't about me being selfish, I continued. This is about boundaries. I have worked hard to build a stable life, and I'm not going to risk it just because Tom doesn't want to face the consequences of his actions. He's an adult, and he has to learn how to manage his own problems. Mom's voice cracked a little. But, Sarah, he's your brother. He needs you now more than ever. He can't handle this alone. Tom needs to face the reality of his choices, I replied, my voice steady. I can't keep rescuing him from his mistakes. If I keep giving in, I'll be enabling him to continue down this path, and that's not helping him. Then you're just being heartless, my dad snapped, his frustration clear. We've helped you when you were in trouble. This is the least you can do for your brother. I felt a wave of anger rise in me. I've never asked for you to pay my way, and I'm not going to do that for Tom. I've always worked for everything I have, and I'm not going to let anyone guilt trip me into doing something I know is wrong. At that point, my mom was silent. My dad's voice came through again, sharp and accusing. Fine. If that's how you feel, then maybe you're not the person we thought you were. I took a deep breath. Maybe I'm exactly the person you should have seen all along. Someone who isn't afraid to set boundaries. Someone who's not going to let you push me around. The conversation ended with an air of finality. I knew they were angry, but I also knew I had stood up for myself. I wasn't backing down anymore, no matter how hard they tried to manipulate me. After the heated conversation, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. I had finally stood my ground, but the guilt still lingered. My parents weren't just upset, they were disappointed. And to be honest, part of me felt like I was disappointing them too. But deep down, I knew I had made the right choice for myself. I had worked too hard to let my future be compromised by someone else's irresponsibility. The days following the conversation were tense. My parents didn't reach out immediately, and I didn't feel ready to break the silence either. They were still angry, and I was still processing how they had tried to pressure me into doing something that went against everything I had worked for. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It was my dad. I took a deep breath before answering, bracing myself for more tension. "Sarah," he began, his voice calmer than I had expected. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I've realized something." I remained quiet, letting him speak. Part of me expected more blame, more anger, but instead, there was an unfamiliar sense of humility in his tone. "You're right," he continued. "We were wrong to pressure you like that. Tom's problems aren't yours to fix, and we shouldn't have put that burden on you. I can see now that we were being unfair." I sat there, stunned by his words. For the first time in a long while, my dad wasn't just talking about what he wanted or expected from me. He was acknowledging that he had overstepped. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice softening. "I should have respected your boundaries, and I know I didn't. You've always been there for the family, and I should have trusted you to make the right decision." His apology wasn't easy for me to accept. I had always been the responsible one in the family, and to hear my dad admit that he was wrong felt like a small victory. It wasn't enough to erase everything, but it was a step in the right direction. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied, my voice quiet but genuine. "I've always tried to be there for all of you, but I need to take care of myself, too. I can't keep sacrificing my own well-being for others." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I understand, and I'm proud of you for sticking to your guns. It's not easy, but you're doing what's right for you." Hearing those words from my dad made me realize how much I had grown throughout this whole ordeal. I wasn't just standing up for myself anymore. I was learning how to set boundaries with the people I loved, even if it meant making tough decisions. We ended the conversation on a more positive note, with an understanding between us that hadn't been there before. My dad was still disappointed in Tom, but he finally saw my side of things. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Later that evening, I got a text from my mom. It was short, but it still meant something to me. "I've thought about what you said, and I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have pushed you. I love you." I stared at the message for a long time. My mom wasn't perfect, but she had come around, and that was what mattered. I replied, "I love you too, Mom. Thanks for understanding." While my relationship with my parents wasn't magically fixed, I felt like we had made real progress. They had apologized, and I had been firm in my decision. We were slowly rebuilding the trust that had been strained, but I was proud of how I had handled the situation. Later that evening, I got a text from my mom. It was short, but it still meant something to me. "I've thought about what you said, and I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have pushed you. I love you." I stared at the message for a long time. My mom wasn't perfect, but she had come around, and that was what mattered. I replied, "I love you too, Mom. Thanks for understanding." While my relationship with my parents wasn't magically fixed, I felt like we had made real progress. They had apologized, and I had been firm in my decision. We were slowly rebuilding the trust that had been strained, but I was proud of how I had handled the situation. The weeks following that conversation were surprisingly quiet. It seemed like my parents had taken a step back and were reflecting on everything that had happened. I wasn't expecting things to change overnight, but I noticed small shifts in how they treated me. They no longer pushed me or tried to guilt trip me about Tom's situation. It was as though they finally understood that their expectations were unrealistic, and that I had every right to set boundaries for my own well-being. However, the tension between Tom and me still lingered. He had not reached out after our initial conversation, which I found a bit odd. I had assumed that after the pressure from my parents, he would at least try to mend things with me, but that wasn't the case. Instead, I was left wondering where we stood. He still hadn't taken responsibility for his debt, and to be honest, I was starting to feel frustrated again. It wasn't until one afternoon when Tom finally reached out. The message he sent me was brief, but it caught me off guard. "Can we talk?" My heart skipped a beat. After all the tension, all the arguments, I wasn't sure what to expect. Was this his attempt at getting me to change my mind about helping him? Or was it something else entirely? I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him forever. So, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop that evening. When I arrived, Tom was already there, sitting in the corner booth, looking like he had something heavy on his mind. He was the same as always, but there was something different in his eyes. A hint of guilt, maybe, or just the weight of everything that had happened. "Hey," I greeted him, sitting down across from him. "What's going on?" Tom didn't waste any time getting to the point. "Sarah, I know I messed up. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked you for money. I shouldn't have put you in that position." His apology was a lot more direct than I expected, and I could feel the sincerity behind it. I nodded, not sure what to say at first. Part of me wanted to shout at him, to tell him how angry I still was, but another part of me recognized that this was the first time in a long while that Tom had owned up to anything. "I've been in denial about everything," he continued, looking down at his hands. "I didn't want to face the consequences of what I did. But you were right, Sarah. I need to deal with it on my own. I can't keep running away from my problems." It was like a weight lifted from my chest. Tom wasn't asking me for help anymore, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like he was taking responsibility for his actions. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. "I'm glad to hear that, Tom," I said, my voice softening. "I really am. But this isn't something you can fix overnight. You've got a long road ahead of you, and you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. I can't keep bailing you out." "I get that now," he replied, nodding. "And I'm not asking you to. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I hope we can start over." I sat back, processing his words. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. I didn't know what the future held for Tom and me, but for the first time in a while, I felt like we were both on the same page. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking about other things, catching up in a way that felt more genuine than it had in years. It wasn't like the old days, but it was a start. And that was all I could ask for. Tom had made his first real step toward taking responsibility for his life. Now, it was up to him to follow through. And as for me, I had learned how to stand firm in my boundaries, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I would continue to protect my own future. After our conversation at the coffee shop, things between Tom and me were definitely moving in the right direction, but there was still a lot of work to be done. I felt cautiously optimistic, but I knew that the real test would be whether Tom could follow through with his words. He had said all the right things, but I needed to see real change. Actions speak louder than words, and that was something I wasn't going to forget. The next few weeks were quiet, surprisingly so. Tom didn't reach out again asking for money, and I didn't feel the need to check in on him constantly. He seemed to be taking some responsibility for his situation, at least on the surface. He started picking up extra shifts at work and seemed determined to pay off his debt. For the first time, I felt like he was actually working toward fixing things instead of expecting someone to bail him out. I kept my distance, not because I was angry, but because I knew I couldn't be the one to fix his problems. Tom had to do it himself. I wasn't going to let my own life be derailed just because he couldn't manage his finances. That was the hardest part for me. As much as I wanted to be the supportive sister, I had learned that sometimes supporting someone means letting them stand on their own. A few weeks later, my parents called me again. This time, I wasn't immediately filled with dread or frustration. I had learned to manage my emotions better since the initial confrontation. I answered, hoping this would be a more productive conversation. Sarah, we've been talking, my dad said, his voice sounding more calm than before. We've been thinking a lot about how we've handled everything with Tom, and we owe you an apology. I blinked, stunned. My dad? Apologizing? We've been unfair to you, he continued. We didn't respect your boundaries, and we tried to make you feel guilty for not helping Tom. That was wrong. You were right to stand your ground. I was taken aback, but in a good way. For the first time, my parents were acknowledging my perspective, not just because it suited them, but because they genuinely saw things differently. My mom spoke up next. We're sorry, Sarah, she said. We've had a lot of time to think about it, and we realize we pushed you too hard. We should have supported you, not made you feel like you had to sacrifice everything for Tom. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb what they were saying. It wasn't easy for me to let go of the anger I had felt toward them, but hearing their apology felt like a step forward, a huge one. I appreciate you saying that, I replied, my voice steady but emotional. It means a lot to me. I've been trying to set boundaries for myself, and it wasn't easy when I felt like no one understood. We understand now, my dad said. And we've talked to Tom too. He's been working hard to pay off his debt, and he's taken responsibility for his actions. He's finally starting to grow up. I felt a small sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about my parents apologizing. It was about them acknowledging that Tom was taking responsibility and that we could all move forward, as a family, with a better understanding of each other's limits. I'm glad to hear that, I said quietly. I've always wanted the best for Tom, but I can't carry the weight of his mistakes anymore. I just want him to learn from this. I know, my mom replied, and we're proud of you for standing firm. It's not easy, but you did the right thing. After that call, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. It was one thing to stand up to Tom, but it was another to have my parents finally validate my choices. They weren't perfect, but they had come around, and that meant more than I ever thought it would. As for Tom, he didn't ask me for anything again. He seemed to be managing his debt slowly, making payments on his own. I didn't hear from him as much, but the distance didn't feel like rejection anymore. It felt like growth. We were both learning how to navigate our relationship in a healthier way. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with my decisions. I had stood my ground, I had set boundaries, and most importantly, I had learned to protect myself, even if it meant disappointing those I loved. The days and weeks after the phone call with my parents were filled with mixed emotions. I felt relieved, of course, relieved that my parents had finally seen things from my perspective. But there was still a part of me that struggled with the fallout. Even though they apologized, it didn't erase the fact that I had been made to feel guilty for standing up for myself. It didn't change how hard it had been to say no to Tom and risk being the bad guy in the family. What I didn't expect, however, was the strange shift that happened in our family dynamic. With my parents stepping back from pressuring me, I felt like I was no longer the black sheep of the family. Instead of feeling like the outsider, I started to realize that I had done something important, not just for myself, but for the entire family. Setting boundaries had created space for a healthier, more honest relationship between us. And that, surprisingly, became the turning point. As for Tom, I kept my distance, but I noticed small changes. He started calling me every few weeks, not to ask for money, but to check in. He was talking about his struggles, his plans to pay off his debt, and his attempts to get his life back on track. The change in him wasn't instant, but it was noticeable. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders as he stopped depending on others to solve his problems. He was learning, slowly but surely, that he had to stand on his own 2 feet. One evening, after about a month of not seeing or hearing much from him, Tom called me unexpectedly. This time, there was no desperation in his voice. There was no, "I need help" plea. Instead, he sounded calm, even a bit proud. "I just wanted to say thanks again, Sarah," he said. "I know I've been a pain in the ass, but I've been sticking to my plan. I'm making progress. I've paid off a good chunk of the debt, and I'm looking at how to manage things better moving forward. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and I realized that this was the first time he hadn't been looking for an escape or someone to take care of him. It was a huge step for him. I'm really proud of you, Tom, I said genuinely. It sounds like you're doing the right things. Yeah, well, I guess I'm learning, he replied, his tone a little more humble than I had heard in a long time. You were right. I had to face the music, but I'm glad you didn't just bail me out. It made me realize I had to do it myself. Hearing that made everything worth it. I had set a boundary for a reason, because I needed to protect myself, but also because I knew Tom needed to grow up. For so long, I had been stuck in the role of the caretaker, always trying to fix his mistakes. But I was finally seeing him take responsibility for himself, and that was more than I could have asked for. As the months passed, Tom continued to make progress. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was better. We still had some bumps along the way, but I no longer felt like I was carrying the weight of his mistakes. And more importantly, I wasn't constantly walking on eggshells around him. I began to focus more on my own life, on my own future. I started taking steps to plan for the things I had always put off: travel, investing, and even thinking about long-term goals for my career. For the first time in a long time, I felt free from the emotional baggage I had been carrying for years. My parents and I didn't discuss the whole situation much after that, but the dynamic between us had shifted. There was a new respect in the air, one that came from understanding that we all had a part to play in each other's lives, but no one person was responsible for fixing everything. I felt like my parents saw me as more than just the responsible daughter. I was a person with my own life to live, and that was a huge realization. At the end of the day, it wasn't about money. It wasn't about Tom's debt or my parents' expectations. It was about boundaries, respect, and understanding. And for the first time, I felt like I had finally found that balance. As time passed, I started to feel that things were slowly returning to normal in my family. It wasn't the old normal, but a healthier, more balanced one. I had learned to set boundaries, and surprisingly, my parents had begun to respect them. Tom, too, made progress with his debt. It wasn't a quick fix, but he was working hard and seemed to take ownership of his actions for the first time in years. Yet, there were still moments of doubt. Every now and then, I wondered if my parents would slip back into their old habits, pressuring me to step in when things got tough for Tom. There was still the temptation to step in when I saw Tom making bad decisions, but I knew I couldn't keep fixing things for him. He needed to learn how to handle his life, and I had to trust that he would. One evening, after a quiet family dinner, I found myself in the kitchen with my mom. We hadn't really talked much since the whole ordeal, and I was surprised when she started the conversation. "Sarah," she began, looking at me with a sincerity I hadn't seen before, "I want to thank you. I realize now that you've been teaching us all something about boundaries. When you said no to Tom, I didn't understand, but I get it now. You've been doing what's best for you, and we should have respected that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. My mom, who had always put family first, now acknowledged that I had been right to protect myself. It felt like a small but important victory. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," I said, my voice quiet. "But I had to look out for myself." "I know," she replied, "and I'm proud of you. You've always been the strong one in the family, but I see now that you deserve to live for yourself, too." That conversation, though simple, was a breakthrough for us. My mom's shift in perspective meant more than any apology. It wasn't just about me feeling understood. It was about a recognition that I wasn't responsible for fixing everyone's problems. I didn't have to sacrifice my own needs for the sake of others. A few weeks later, Tom called me. This time, it wasn't a plea for money or help. It was just him reaching out. "Hey, Sarah," he said, sounding more relaxed than I'd heard in a while. "I just wanted to thank you again. I've been sticking to my plan. I've paid off a chunk of the debt, and I feel like I'm finally getting a handle on things. I couldn't have done it without your tough love." Hearing him say that was a turning point. For the first time, I felt like Tom wasn't just trying to avoid responsibility, he was embracing it. "I'm proud of you, Tom," I said, genuinely. "Keep it up." And he did. Over the next few months, Tom continued making progress, taking responsibility for his finances, and no longer relying on me or my parents to bail him out. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was healthier, and that was enough for me. In the end, I learned that boundaries weren't just about keeping people out. They were about creating space for healthier relationships. I wasn't just standing up for myself, I was helping my family learn to respect my needs, and in doing so, I was giving them the tools to grow too.